Morning. Today's story continues on in the Gospel of Mark. After last week's story in which Jesus taught about avoiding sin and choosing to be salt. And today, we begin Mark chapter 10. Jesus and his disciples left that place. And they went into the region of Judea beyond the Jordan River. There were many towns and villages in that place. And again, in this new place, a crowd of people came when they heard of Jesus. They came to him. And as was his custom, he began to teach them. And then some Pharisees came to test Jesus. So they asked him, "Is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife?" So Jesus turned to them and asked, "What did Moses command you?" And they said, "Moses permitted a man to write a certificate of divorce and send her away." "It was because your hearts were hard that Moses wrote you this law," Jesus replied. "But at the beginning of creation, God made them male and female. For this reason, a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. So they are no longer two, but one flesh. Therefore, what God has joined together, let no one separate." When they had come back into one of the houses, Jesus' disciples asked him about this teaching. And he answered them, "Anyone who divorces his wife and marries another woman commits adultery against her. And if she divorces her husband and marries another man, she commits adultery." People from the crowd were bringing little children to Jesus. And his disciples, who were there with him, turned to rebuke them. But Jesus was indignant. He said to his disciples, "Let the little children come to me, and do not hinder them, for the kingdom of God belongs to such as these." "Truly I tell you," he continued, "anyone who will not receive the kingdom of God like a little child will never enter it." And he took the children in his arms, placed his hands on them, and blessed them. Now, as always, I invite you to wonder along with me about today's story. There were some hard teachings there, but let's begin at the beginning. Jesus is in a new region here across the Jordan River. And yet again, these crowds come to him as soon as he arrives. And the story tells us, as was his custom, he taught them. I wonder what you learn about Jesus from this story, this moment. He's generous, okay? Generous because he teaches them when they come to him. He's willing to respond to their desire.
And he felt called to teach.
He felt called to teach, no matter where he was, just the people he came across, he felt called to teach, to preach.
Would people be disappointed if he didn't preach?
So maybe people would be disappointed if he didn't, and so he felt a desire not to disappoint. I wonder what.
I always like how kind Jesus is. There's never a story where, he's making people feel really uncomfortable for their humanity and their question.
Sure, so he's always kind and patient with people who are coming with questions, who are eagerly seeking to learn. And that's different when you see in a moment, I'll talk about how people were coming to test him. And that's a different experience. But yeah, for those who were eagerly coming to learn, he has this patience, this kindness. I wonder what it says to you that Jesus says to the Pharisees that certain laws were given them because of the hardness of their hearts.
Asking them to change their beliefs.
So he's asking them to change their beliefs. Okay. In what way?
From the ways that they've grown up knowing or accepted. He's couching it in a new way that changes their culture, basically.
Yeah, so perhaps he's saying to them they're holding on too tightly to these things that maybe were not, given for a contextual purpose, but rather, and not necessarily the ideal. I wonder what else that says to you. So I wonder what it says to you when Jesus says to the Pharisees that certain laws were given because of the hardness of their hearts. Another way of putting it, I wonder if you've ever experienced something where a certain rule or law you knew was put in place, but then that was only for some specific purpose, and you realize that that's actually not the big picture.
I can think of in our family, screen time is always like a hard thing. We have gone through lots of different iterations of absolutely no screen time. You can have it when I want you to have it, and you can have it for a certain amount of time during the day. I think ideally, like, it wouldn't need a rule, right? Like, we would regulate, we would use a screen for connecting as a family, getting new ideas, but that's not quite the way it works out most of the time. And so I have to create rules around this thing because it's there, and I don't know, our hearts are hardened, whatever that means. But yeah, I mean, ideally, this wouldn't be a thing. We would sit around
Sure.
a fire and tell stories, right?
Yeah, so sometimes rules are put in place in the absence of a healthy relationship with something. And the rule is, our best way of getting that when we can't get to the main thing.
Yeah, good way to put it.
Jesus offers a very strong teaching against divorce in today's reading. I know many of us have loved ones who have experienced divorce. Some of us have experienced divorce ourselves. So I wonder where you experience God's love in this teaching.
Well, as someone who is married to someone who was divorced, had a marriage fall apart, and really married at a young age, and he's an Episcopal priest. This is a hard teaching to hear, and yet I feel like Jesus' message about forgiveness and new life out of that. Now, I being Donald's second wife and almost 50 years married, with a lot of wondering from things that have come out of that. I feel like the reality of the failure of that first relationship for him is real. We've done our very best to make peace out of that, and now a good relationship with Don's first wife and her husband and our stepdaughter, my stepdaughter, his daughter, on that marriage, and that's been true for many years. So there was an experience of healing and forgiveness, really.
Okay. So you have this experience of
Yeah.
forgiveness and healing, and that can be hard to mesh with, to join with this teaching.
Is he saying maybe a marriage is supposed to be a bond that happens once with someone who you truly love, and you shouldn't waste that? So you need to search for the perfect person before marrying.
You're asking whether he's saying that.
I'm
What do you
thinking,
imagine? Yeah.
is he saying that?
Yeah. Perhaps. perhaps he's saying that is what ideally we would seek.
I think your question about, or bringing the focus of laws, it may be because of the hardness of people's heart, maybe look at it in a new way. Because at first I was really ticked off. And I don't remember Jesus saying that, especially because I'm going through divorce right now. But I thought it was interesting that Moses made it seem like it was really easy to divorce. And I feel like if you think about that because of a hardness of heart place, that since the power of marriage and heteronormative differences in the man, it made it easy to cast off the woman. It's sort of like a heart way. And Jesus is maybe specifically looking at that and saying, trying to soften men's hearts towards their spouses and say, you can't just go willy-nilly and throw the person away. So I wonder if there's some of that. Or also,
Sure.
like Ellen was talking about, I don't know.
Yeah,
It's
so
still having feeling or healing and restructuring.
sure. Yeah, there's always a pendulum swing. Perhaps it was too easy to choose divorce, and one can see this as a corrective, a way of saying, yeah,
You know, but
yes.
It does seem
Um,
to, sorry.
Or,
Well, I was, the last time we were here, I was reading a book during church, and it was, what I was reading was about the genealogy of the forefathers, and many of them had multiple partners and families with multiple women, and that is with producing important figures in Israel and in the Jewish part of the tradition, and so this is in the face of that. And that I'm just trying to reconcile that.
yeah, so you're sensing the tension between this image of marriage and the actual history of Jesus' own lineage, which was not so clear cut, and marriage often isn't so clear cut, and so this is perhaps a maybe oversimplified image. I don't know. Yeah, Carrie.
I thought Jesus' words were just ambiguous enough to be interpreted in multiple directions, and that you could interpret it as God was present at the first relationship, and therefore man can't break it. But also that couple invited God into the relationship and have an understanding, and it's kind of up to that trio, two partners and God, to decide together that it's not fruitful, and it's okay to end it because it's a relationship between the couple and God, not
Sure.
man's decision.
Interesting.
So
So yeah,
it goes
so you're
both
seeing
ways.
that there are not two but three parties to a
Right.
divorce.
And it's not the community's decision,
Hmm.
it's between the two people and their relationship with God about how to move forward.
Yeah.
Therefore, okay.
And perhaps that is also another way of offering that corrective, that it was too easy if it's just two parties to a divorce, but actually we have to honor this third party, that God's presence in the marriage as well. Jesus, later in today's story, he welcomes the children to him, despite his disciples trying to keep them away. And he says, anyone who will not receive the kingdom of God like a little child will never enter it. So I wonder what it means to enter the kingdom like a little child.
Is he saying that if you never learn about it, you never worship it? And he's saying at a young age, if you learn about it, worship it, you can keep up that throughout the rest of your life.
So having the mind of a child, being willing to learn and enter into it, perhaps especially at a young age, then you can keep that with you throughout your life.
Yeah, but I do think it would be really hard because I think maybe Jesus might be one of the only people who's done that. But I do think you have to, like, learning something at a very young age is usually much easier than later.
Sure. Yeah, so there's that sense of our brains are wired to learn as children, and it's hard to keep on learning as adults. And so perhaps there really is that sense of openness, of learning to enter into the kingdom.
If you have a beginner's mind, even if you're an adult, you avoid the hardness of learning.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, perhaps the antithesis of the hardness of heart, the opposite of hardness of heart, is a beginner's mind. Mm-hmm.
I teach in Montessori preschools, and Maria Montessori describes the children as an uncarved block or an empty canvas.
Mm-hmm.
So they're, like this young person said, they're just eager to learn, and they accept so easily. They also forget. They don't carry Monday's obnoxiosity to Tuesday. They don't come in and say, I'm still mad at you. They get over it, and they actually forget about it. And
Okay.
I remember in my own upbringing, somewhere along the line, was, Jesus is like, I already paid for your sin. What sin? That's gone. We're the ones that carry it all. As as we grow.
Yeah.
Oh, I still feel badly about what I did in fourth grade, or to my own children. But the children, my own son, I would say fourth grade, I would say, oh, I remember when you were like, Mom, it's cool. He forgets it, even as an adult, he doesn't go there. But I sometimes, want to keep beating myself up. And so it's much better to be like the children and say, we dealt with that.
Yeah, so children can let things go perhaps
Yes.
more easily than adults. I wonder, when it says that Jesus put his arms on the children and blessed them, I wonder if you can imagine what words he spoke as he blessed the children.
I have this image that he wouldn't even need words because he had that aura that was just so strong, which drew everyone to him wanting to hear his teachings, that just his presence and just the physical touch, or not even that, just his glow, his aura would be surrounding people, and that would feel, the person receiving it would experience a blessing, not necessarily even with words involved.
So there's something so powerful about Jesus' presence, the glow around him, that perhaps words were not even necessary.
I think that as a parent, I think he probably had that same blessing that we all want for our children, which is that they're happy and healthy, curious about the world, constantly learning, and deepening each day in love.
So blessing them with happiness, with health, with curiosity, and depth of love. What does that mean to you?
I don't know. I wonder, I became a parent when I was young, so I don't have a lot of experience as an adult. Well, no, that's not true. I have a lot of experience as an adult caring for children who are not mine, but I don't have any without the context of being a parent. So I could tell you what I would want to say to my children and what my perspective as a mother would be. Yeah, but I wonder, like, the depth of Jesus's blessing and his understanding of the children, was it less muddied because he didn't have those insecurities? Right, like all the junk we carry about, raising children. Or was it, it's hard to say Jesus had less depth because he wasn't a parent, because he's a divine figure and all. But it makes me wonder.
There is both depth and complexity to being a parent and having that direct relationship with your child. And so, yeah, wondering what that could mean for Jesus not to have that.
How would he have dealt with a 2-year-old full-out tantrum for
Yeah, what would Jesus do? A 2-year-old with throwing a tantrum. It's a good question. I often ask myself that.
In a way, Jesus is like a father of all the children. So he has experience, but I don't really know how to explain.
Yeah, so there's also that dimension in which Jesus is a parental figure to all of us, being God who, through whom we all came. So I wonder now, as we wrap up, where the good news is for you in today's story.
It's easier to find in the second half.
So you're feeling more good news in his relationship with children than in his teaching about marriage.
What Ryan said, though, about marriage being sacred and like something that you step into with a lot of intention, and Terry said, having God present in that relationship, that does give me a bit of hope, but it is mighty, it's hard. Yeah.
For sure.
One thing I think is wonderful that comes out of this, Jesus sees the children and their value, and that is it's so profound, especially when you think about the culture he's coming out of, where I think, well, honestly, I don't know. I realize I don't know how, children were held, but it's just so clear he sees them, sees their importance.
So he sees and values and honors children in a way that was definitely not the norm for the culture.
Yeah, I'm sort of assuming that, but I don't know a lot about what
For that culture and for our culture, I would say
Yeah,
as well.
yeah, I think that's true.
I have a story. We were visiting a museum, and it was like a Native Alaskan. We happened upon this Native Alaskan celebration thing. So these elders from that group were telling stories, and we're talking about how in their culture they highly value the children. And so we're standing there with like a big group of kids, and the kids keep like interrupting, and the guy pauses every time to address the child and hear them. And most of the adults are like, stop. Yes, I'm going to say stop interrupting him. And he's like, no. In my culture, we honor the children. And that's profound to me. So after he finishes his talk, I'm like waiting to go up and say like, thank you so much, that meant a lot to me. And because we're taking a long time, one of these three, I won't say which one, comes over and he's like, Mom, I want to go, can we please go? And I was like, no, I want you to talk to this guy. So not honoring the children in that moment. And it was so ironic because I was standing there waiting to tell him, it was so profound that you said you honored the children. And that's what
have no recollection of this.
That is fascinating.
even know.
Well, thank you for sharing that story, and thank you all for sharing your wonderings about today's story.